One evening, after spending the entire day teaching thousands of people by the Sea of Galilee, Jesus looked at his disciples and quietly said, "Let us go across to the other side." They climbed into a fishing boat and pushed away from the shore. The sky was calm, the water was peaceful, and the cool evening breeze made everything feel safe. Jesus, tired from serving people all day, lay down at the back of the boat and fell asleep. As they traveled farther from land, the weather suddenly changed. Dark clouds gathered across the sky, the wind became fierce, and enormous waves began crashing into the boat. Water poured over the sides until the boat started filling up. The disciples were experienced fishermen who had spent their lives on this lake, yet they had never seen a storm this terrifying. They fought with all their strength to keep the boat afloat, but every wave seemed stronger than the last. Fear took hold of every heart because they believed they were going to die. In the middle of the chaos, Jesus was still sleeping peacefully. Finally, the disciples rushed to him and cried, "Lord, save us! We are going to drown." Jesus stood up calmly. There was no fear in his eyes. He looked at the violent wind and the crashing waves and simply said, "Peace. Be still." The moment those words were spoken, the wind stopped blowing. The roaring waves became completely still. The dark clouds cleared, and the sea became as calm as glass. Silence covered the lake. The disciples stared at Jesus in complete amazement. They looked at one another and whispered, "Who is this man? Even the wind and the sea obey him." That night they realized they were not simply following a teacher. They were standing in the presence of the Son of God, the one who had authority over all creation. The same voice that created the heavens and the earth had spoken to the storm, and creation obeyed its creator. This miracle continues to remind people today that every life faces storms. Sometimes the storm is fear, sometimes it is sickness, loss, loneliness, or uncertainty. There are moments when it feels like God is silent, just as Jesus seemed asleep in the boat. But he is always present, even when we cannot understand what he is doing. The storm did not last forever because Jesus was in the boat. In the same way, no problem is greater than his power. When we place our trust in him, he gives peace that cannot be taken away by fear or circumstances. Millions of believers around the world still remember his words spoken on that lake nearly 2,000 years ago, "Peace. Be still." Those words continue to bring hope to anyone who trusts in him, because the one who calmed the sea is still able to calm every troubled heart today. The next morning, after the disciples had witnessed Jesus calm the storm, they arrived on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee. As soon as Jesus stepped out of the boat, a man came running toward him from the nearby tombs. The man had suffered for many years. He lived among the graves, separated from his family and his community. No one could control him. People had tried to bind him with chains, but he always broke free. Day and night he wandered through the hills, crying out in pain and hurting himself with stones. Everyone in the region feared him. But when the man saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees before him. Jesus was not afraid. He looked at the man with compassion instead of fear. Jesus knew the suffering that had controlled his life for so long. With complete authority, Jesus commanded the evil spirits to leave the man. The spirits begged Jesus for permission to enter a nearby herd of pigs. Jesus allowed it, and immediately the spirits left the man. The herd rushed down the steep hillside into the sea and was drowned. The people who cared for the pigs ran into the town and told everyone what had happened. Soon a large crowd gathered around Jesus. They expected to find the wild man they had feared for years. Instead, they saw him sitting peacefully beside Jesus, fully clothed, calm, and in his right mind. The man who had once terrified an entire region had been completely transformed. The crowd was amazed, but many were also afraid because they had never witnessed such power before. They asked Jesus to leave their region. As Jesus prepared to get back into the boat, the man who had been healed begged to go with him. He wanted to follow Jesus wherever he went. But Jesus lovingly told him, "Go home to your family and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." The man obeyed. He traveled throughout the surrounding cities, telling everyone what Jesus had done for him. Everywhere he went, people were amazed by his story. This miracle showed that no one is beyond the reach of God's mercy. No life is too broken, no past is too dark, and no chain is too strong for Jesus to break. The same Savior who calmed the storm also brought peace to a troubled soul. His power was not only over nature but also over darkness, fear, and despair. Wherever Jesus went, he brought hope, healing, freedom, and new life to everyone who believed in him. After leaving that region, Jesus crossed the Sea of Galilee once again. As his boat reached the shore, a great crowd gathered around him. People came from every direction because they had heard about his miracles and his message of hope. Among the crowd was a synagogue leader named Jairus. He was a respected man, but on that day he fell at Jesus' feet with tears in his eyes. "My little daughter is dying," he pleaded. "Please come and place your hands on her so she may live." Without hesitation, Jesus went with him. As they walked through the crowded streets, people pressed in from every side, hoping to see him or receive healing. In that crowd was a woman who had suffered from constant bleeding for 12 long years. She had visited many doctors and spent everything she owned, yet her condition only became worse. She believed with all her heart that if she could simply touch the edge of Jesus' garment, she would be healed. Quietly she reached through the crowd and touched his cloak. Instantly, the bleeding stopped. Strength returned to her body, and she knew she had been completely healed. Jesus stopped walking and asked, "Who touched me?" The disciples were surprised because so many people were surrounding him, but Jesus knew that healing power had gone out from him. The woman, trembling with fear, stepped forward and told him the whole truth. Jesus looked at her with kindness and said, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. You are healed." While Jesus was still speaking, messengers arrived from Jairus' house with heartbreaking news. "Your daughter has died. There is no need to trouble the teacher anymore." The words filled everyone with sorrow. But Jesus turned to Jairus and said, "Do not be afraid. Only believe." When they reached the house, people were crying loudly. Jesus said, "Why are you weeping? The child is not lost forever." Many laughed because they believed all hope was gone. Jesus entered the room with the child's parents and a few disciples. He took the little girl's hand and gently said, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." Immediately, she opened her eyes, stood up, and began walking. Her parents were overwhelmed with joy, and everyone present was filled with amazement. That day, Jesus revealed once again that his authority reached beyond sickness and even beyond death itself. He showed that faith in him brings hope when every human solution has failed. The woman found healing because she trusted him, and Jairus found joy because he chose to believe even when hope seemed lost. The miracles reminded everyone that nothing is impossible for the Son of God, and that those who place their faith in him can find healing, hope, and life even in the darkest moments. After these miracles, Jesus traveled from village to village, teaching about the kingdom of God. Everywhere he went, crowds gathered to hear his words because they spoke with authority unlike anyone they had ever known. People brought the sick, the blind, the weak, and the broken, and Jesus welcomed them with compassion. One day, thousands of people followed him into a remote place. They listened to his teaching from morning until evening. As the sun began to set, the disciples became concerned because there was no food nearby. They came to Jesus and said, "Send the people away so they can buy something to eat." Jesus looked at them and replied, "You give them something to eat." The disciples were confused. They searched among the crowd and found only 5 small loaves of bread and 2 fish. It seemed impossible to feed so many people with so little. Jesus asked everyone to sit down on the green grass in groups. Then he took the bread and the fish into his hands. Looking toward heaven, he gave thanks to God and began breaking the bread. He handed it to the disciples, and they distributed it to the people. Something incredible happened. The bread never ran out. The fish never became empty. Every time the disciples returned for more, there was still enough to give. Thousands of men, women, and children ate until they were completely satisfied. When everyone had finished eating, Jesus told his disciples to gather the leftovers so that nothing would be wasted. They collected 12 full baskets of bread and fish. The crowd stood in amazement. They had witnessed a miracle that no human being could explain. With only 5 loaves and 2 fish, Jesus had fed thousands of hungry people. Many realized that Jesus was more than a teacher. He was the one who could provide when there seemed to be nothing left. He showed that God's provision is never limited by human circumstances. The miracle became a lasting reminder that when people place even the little they have into God's hands, He is able to do far more than anyone could imagine. Where the world sees scarcity, Jesus brings abundance. Where people see impossibility, He reveals the power of God. Those who trusted Him that day not only received food for their bodies but also witnessed the compassion, generosity, and divine power of the Son of God. After everyone had eaten and the 12 baskets of leftovers had been collected, Jesus told His disciples to get into the boat and cross the Sea of Galilee while He stayed behind to dismiss the crowd. When the people had gone home, Jesus climbed a mountain alone to pray. As night fell, He remained there in quiet fellowship with His Father. Meanwhile, the disciples were far out on the lake. A strong wind began to blow against them, and the waves grew higher with every passing hour. They rowed with all their strength, but the wind pushed them farther from shore. The night became darker, and they struggled to keep the boat moving. Just before dawn, something happened that none of them could have imagined. They saw a figure walking across the water toward them. At first, they were terrified. They thought they were seeing a ghost, and fear filled the boat. Then they heard a familiar voice. "Take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid." It was Jesus. He was walking on the surface of the sea as if it were solid ground. The wind and the waves were beneath His feet. Peter looked at Jesus and said, "Lord, if it is really You, tell me to come to You on the water." Jesus answered with one simple word. "Come." Peter stepped out of the boat. For a few moments, he walked on the water toward Jesus. As long as his eyes remained fixed on the Lord, he continued walking. But when he noticed the powerful wind and the crashing waves, fear entered his heart. He began to sink beneath the water. Immediately Peter cried out, "Lord, save me." Without hesitation, Jesus reached out His hand and caught him. He lifted Peter up and gently said, "Why did you doubt? Your faith became weaker than your fear." Together they climbed back into the boat. The moment Jesus entered the boat, the wind stopped completely. The sea became calm once again. The disciples stood in silence. Then they knelt before Jesus and worshipped Him, saying, "Truly, You are the Son of God." That night they learned that faith is not the absence of storms. Faith is trusting Jesus even while the storm is still raging. When Peter focused on Christ, he walked above the waves. When he focused on his fear, he began to sink. Yet even then, Jesus did not abandon him. He reached out His hand and saved him. The miracle reminded everyone that no matter how powerful life's storms become, Jesus is always near. His hand is always ready to lift those who call on Him with faith, and His presence brings peace where fear once ruled.